Hello, welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com in association with Oddschecker. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by George Elek and Sam Tighe to go through this week's Premier League fixtures. The two main games that we're going to focus on this week are Spurs against Chelsea and Newcastle against Arsenal. We're going to rattle through our predictions as well. Pick a little bet by Oddschecker to try and win you some money this weekend, and then we'll finish with our team in focus section, which handily for Sam and myself this week is Aston Villa. George, how are you? Not been on for a few weeks, not been very well.
Yeah, I'm getting there now. I was not well for about 2 weeks. I had ulcers on my throat, which is a really nice illness for a professional podcaster. So that wasn't great. But I'm fighting fit now, but quite excited that I can just basically leave the call when you guys talk about Villa towards the end of the
it'd be great for you. It's great for us to have a professional podcaster on. I didn't know we had any of those on this show, so that's excellent, George.
Yeah, well, I think we all are, sadly. I mean, we are getting paid to do this, so that's it. We're not amateurs.
Sporter people might be surprised to learn that I'm getting paid in fairness. Sam, how are you?
Yeah, just talking about professional podcasters there as I take a sip from my SpongeBob named mug. Really doing George no favours there with the descriptions, but sounds like I've been better than George for the last couple of weeks, so I'd take that.
Right then, so let's get into the pod. Let's get into the show. Let's talk about Spurs against Chelsea. And George, the big news for Spurs is the return of Rodrigo Bentancur. That'll be, obviously they're going really, really well at the moment. Tottenham Hotspur midfield's actually been functioning really well with Bissouma and Sarr, but they've got some AFCON problems to come later on in the season. Getting Bentancur back will be a massive boost because, being honest, when he's fully fit and firing, he does probably get in their best 11.
Yeah, he probably does. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how he recovers from an ACL injury. It's not easy for players necessarily to come back and be quite the same player that they once were, but he's not necessarily someone who relied on their athleticism, albeit I am excited to see him play in a Ange Postecoglou team rather than an Antonio Conte team where, having watched him in the past for Juventus, he is definitely more of a physical pressing midfielder than we necessarily seen in a Spurs shirt so far, and he should be given license to do that. But I think it's just, the easy answer here is that when he got injured, it was a massive blow to Spurs. I remember at the time it was kind of they were having to roll with the punches, and you kind of almost forget about him. And the fact that he's now coming back into the side and it's kind of up for debate as to whether or not he fits into their best 11, I think shows not only how far individual players have improved in that time, Bissouma obviously being the key one, but also just the levels that Ange Postecoglou has seen or has instigated that have risen under his tenure. So he's a player who absolutely will offer something different in that midfield. I'm sure he'll play a massive part if he's able to stay fit. But in the same way that Kulusevski felt like he was such an important player for Spurs during that period, whereas now he's still a very good player, but he's part of what is a well-oiled functioning machine that Tottenham are right now. So a big boost, but by no means something that's absolutely necessary for Spurs fans.
I think it's a good point about Kulusevski, actually, but I think if you took Kulusevski out of that team, you'd really, really notice it. I think he's probably not getting the plaudits or getting the goals and assists that perhaps he was at one point, but if you take him out, I think he's a real key bit of that Spurs team, and it might fall down, but again, I think you've hit the nail on the head with the fact that they are a team. How good are they at the moment, Sam? This is a stupendous start to the season. Postecoglou to have the record that he has after 10 games this season, Premier League record broken. That's absolutely exceptional.
It is, yeah. It's an exceptional start. It's interesting. I mean, basically, I think in the Premier League era, any team that has started with this many wins on the board from this many opening games has never finished below third. Not to pile any certain pressure on any certain teams. I know Spurs fans are just trying to enjoy it while it lasts and see how it goes. And the way you talk about Kulusevski there, it's interesting because I kind of feel like Spurs have 9 key players, and that's obviously really stupid. You can't really say you can 9 key players, but it just highlights how well oiled.
I want to know who the 2 are that aren't key players in the team.
Who would it be? It would be Pape Sarr. I don't think Pape Sarr is key. Very sorry to him. He doesn't quite make the cut. Maybe it's 10 and Pape Sarr. Because I'm sure you're the same as me, right? You're thinking, right, well, if Bentancur is going to step into the first 11, it's not going to be in Bissouma's place. Okay, yes, during AFCON, but generally speaking, where would he go? You've got to assume that it would be Pape Sarr's position and actually a Bissouma Bentancur midfield. I mean, it's crazy to think that this Spurs team could actually level up even further based on what we're watching right now, because they're top of the league. They deserve to be so. They've been one of the best teams in the league, and that's an amazing thing to say when you share a league with Man City and Arsenal and Liverpool. And yet and Villa, and they could get even better. They could get even better depending on Bentancur's recovery. The one question I would posit is, what we've watched from Bissouma so far this season, his ability to drive from deep with the ball at his feet, but also play under very intense pressure during build-up and distribute the ball really cleanly to make sure that Spurs' build-up play is working. That is what I identify as Bentancur's big strengths too. So when you've got two players that can do that, first of all, great to have the depth. But second, how do you accommodate them both? How do you change things to make it work? So while on paper he's an upgrade to Sarr, he's so similar to Bissouma in certain ways that some tweaks will have to come if he comes into this team. And I'm fascinated to see what Postecoglou does, because unlike you, Dan, I don't think he wants to change a winning formula.
No, I don't think Bentancur will come in for a few weeks. In fairness, George has got his hand raised like he's at school. Something you'd like to say, George?
Yeah, I just knew that you weren't going to let me talk if I didn't do that. Just coming out in defence of Sarr, because I thought it was interesting that when Spurs went to Palace last time out, I think Roy Hodgson, in a very Roy Hodgson way, basically decided that he wasn't going to let Bissouma dictate the tempo of the game, wasn't going to let him do what he'd done for a long time this season, and basically said to Will Hughes, you're just going to go and stand by Bissouma basically and stop the ball going into him. And that meant that Sarr was basically given a lot more, I guess, creative freedom. Like he was getting on the ball in much more advanced areas. And I thought he did really well. And it was interesting that it was Bissouma who got hooked after an hour because he wasn't really impacting the game for Højbjerg, as they kind of acknowledged that for this game, at least Bissouma wasn't going to be allowed to do what he's doing. So firstly, I mean, that is, a year ago, the idea of Yves Bissouma being marked out of a game and being pinpointed as Spurs' biggest threat was absolutely unthinkable. So credit to him. And given that, the way that Postecoglou and what he demands of his midfielders, even though they're not in Europe this season, I do think players like Højbjerg and Bentancur, when they come back, like it's not going to consistently be this Sarr Bissouma midfield duo. I do think we'll see a lot of rotation between them because there are, physical demands that are being asked of these guys, especially in the press.
Yeah, Sam just spoke about Spurs having perhaps 9 key players, and obviously we've said it's a team very much in the mould of the manager now, as well. The manager's getting the best out of them. Brennan Johnson, a player who was raised in the EFL, George, we could probably do one of these every single week. Someone you'll have seen a lot of. How far can he go with Spurs? Because he's a player that really, really impressed me last season. What I liked about him and probably Gibbs White as well at Forest was that they kind of took the pressure on their back and carried Forest forward, drove them forward. Brennan Johnson came on in the last game and made an impact. He's a really good footballer. He's probably have to play from the left, though, at Spurs. Will that suit him? Is he going to be getting their best 11, Brennan Johnson, in your opinion?
I mean, he'll play a lot. I mean, he's one of those players who has had to change his game as he's kind of moved up the pyramids. Like when he was playing in League One for Lincoln, he was just by far and away the best technical player on the pitch. And added to that, he had this incredible pace. And that's a pretty destructive combination to have. And it meant he could play through the middle or out wide. Obviously, he still retains the pace, but his technical ability now, while still being good, isn't levels above the Premier League. So therefore, he's having to almost change the way he plays a little bit. He's best at effectively exploiting space and behind. So I think when Spurs are playing against teams of the high line, that's when he'll be at his most useful. I think that's where we've seen him be incredibly good for Nottingham Forest, who under Steve Cooper, adapted at times to ensure that they weren't necessarily going to be the possession heavy side that we saw Cooper implement at Swansea. A nice story about Brennan Johnson is that he was he kind of owes his career to a mate of his dad's, where David Johnson, his dad, former footballer, was very good friends growing up with Michael Appleton. And Appleton was manager of Lincoln. Brennan Johnson wasn't really getting much of a look in at Nottingham Forest, wasn't seemingly particularly rated by the Forest hierarchy at that time. And so Appleton did his mate a favour and took him out on loan, and he was the best player in the league by miles. So it was that friendship that's led to what we've seen from Johnson from now on. And I'm excited to see, he's working for a manager now who clearly will give him a lot of time and not expect too much too early. Whether or not he's suited to playing off the left, I wouldn't say it's his ideal position, but one of his biggest strengths is versatility, where I think you could play him through the middle in a 2 and you could play him out wide in a 3 as well. So he's a very good player and someone who, even if he may not be as sparkling a talent on the ball as he once was, his willingness to run and his physicality and his pace is definitely something that'll be very handy for them.
Yeah, it would really help Spurs in transition in certain games, I would imagine. Let's talk a little bit about Chelsea then, Sam. Conor Gallagher, captain at the moment in Reece James's absence. He's actually Chelsea's best rated player, according to WhoScored. I will say I've been impressed with him actually in his tactical flexibility when I've watched Chelsea, the way he's drifted out to the right and covered off more attacking players at times. Many felt that he wouldn't be a part of this Chelsea team. Obviously, in the summer transfer window, he was linked with a move away pretty heavily. Done quite well. Has he almost become their Mason Mount?
Interesting. I mean, I've been impressed with him too, and I'm impressed with his character as well. Like, obviously, about half of me thought he was going to leave over the summer. You know, there were bids from West Ham, there was talk, but he's a very resilient character, Conor Gallagher. And one thing's very clear: he wants to play for Chelsea. And he is making that happen. Well, whichever way you want to dice it up, whichever position he ends up in, whichever role he plays, on the pitch, off the pitch, whatever, he ends up doing what he wants to do. He's just got this kind of resilient nature to him. And he's a bit of a force of nature character, I think. And Conor Gallagher wants to play for Chelsea, and he'll find a way. And that's what I'm really impressed with. Like, how many times has he been dropped or moved position or nearly sold or whatever, or downgraded in terms of importance? And he just keeps firing back. And yes, obviously, some of this is to do with the fact that they have injuries. And I don't know what the genuine long-term plan for Conor Gallagher would be when you consider that Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo is presumably the intended midfield holding pair. I mean, they spent enough on them. They're clearly the priority. And then you've got this advanced attacking band of, you know, Cole Palmer and Raheem Sterling and Mykhailo Mudryk, and then you have a striker on top. And where does that leave Gallagher? I don't know, but he keeps finding a way to get into the team, doesn't he? And it's very, very impressive.
We've got Lavia as well.
And Lavia,
for pretty big money who hasn't played yet. Very kind of you saying they've got a striker as well, Sam.
Technically got two.
Agree with you.
He's about to come back from injury, isn't
he? It's not good. It's not good, George, is it? Chelsea, a couple of steps forward in recent weeks. Some of us predicted actually that they'd lose to Brentford at home at the weekend. They're struggling with playing at Stamford Bridge, and this will be a tough test for them away at Spurs. But it's just they're crap, aren't they? Let's just say it. They are crap.
No,
I just don't know if they are. There's something, you know, when you watch them, I think in spells you can see the team that they could be, and I know that's not enough, but like it's easy to forget that in that first half against Brentford, it was just, again, as we've seen so many times, just really poor finishing. They meant that they didn't go in at half time at least 1 or 2 up in there, and then the heads drop. Obviously Nicholas Jackson is woefully short confidence, again missing chances on Wednesday night in the Carabao Cup when he was given a home game against Blackburn to try and finally kind of build up some confidence, and it kind of went the other way. You know, when you look at it's interesting, and obviously there's way more to it than just numbers. But when you look at the XG data for these two sides playing, they're like eerily similar. But Chelsea are just massively underperforming their XG. Spurs are overperforming their XG, and they are poles apart in terms of performance level and where they are in the league table. Like I don't think, you know, if you compare the two clubs that are being perceived from, you know, the elite or the former elite, or those that consider themselves elite in the Premier League, it's Manchester United and Chelsea, who are both being kind of perceived as being laughing stocks. I think Chelsea are way clear of Manchester United in terms of the actual performance level they're putting in. Even if the results are much better, they're way closer to being okay in my mind. And this game, I kind of, you know, looking at the odds now on Odds Checker, like Tottenham are best priced 23-20 to win the game. Chelsea are 9-4. So, you know, the betting markets, despite Spurs being at home, despite Spurs being so much better this season, still have Spurs winning this game as less than a 50% chance, which I think is probably down to the underlying numbers. And it does feel like at some point Chelsea's luck is going to change, and at some point Spurs, despite still being very good, are probably going to come unstuck in a game where they may not deserve to lose. And I, you know, given the rivalry between these two, you know, given especially what we've seen in the past between these two, and Mauricio Pochettino has been in the dugout, albeit in the Spurs dugout, it just feels like a bit of a perfect storm for maybe something quite strange to happen. I mean, I'm not saying I think Chelsea will win, but I wouldn't necessarily be going just by the form book here, where at some point for Chelsea, like basically they're doing things right until they get anywhere near the goal, and then things just seem to blow up. But I'm not sure how long that will last.
I mean, that's a key aspect.
Of course it is. No. I mean, but that's the key, is that like you've got. I mean, take Jackson out of the equation. Like whether it's Raheem Sterling, whether it's Cole Palmer, like even Conor Gallagher is someone who normally is good for some goals, and yet at the moment none of them are contributing really. Like Sterling had a decent start to the season. He still looks very good in possession. He still looks very dangerous. But his finishing seems to have deserted him as well. Like this isn't going to continue. They cannot just continue to squander chances so consistently.
If you take Opta's XG underperformance and look at players specifically underperforming their XG, the top 15, and by that I mean the worst 15, the 15 players who are underperforming the most in the league, 3 of the top 15 are Chelsea players. So Nicholas Jackson.
I'm surprised not more.
Yeah. I mean, so Raheem Sterling's not in there, but he's obviously picked up a few goals. He's playing really well generally, but I kind of expected him to maybe feature in there because he has missed a few. But obviously Jackson's there. Enzo Fernandez is a big culprit here. Like he's great. Yeah,
he's missed a few.
He's great, but he's missed a couple of like huge chances. Enzo Fernandez, and the other one is Cole Palmer, which actually surprised me a little bit. Although thinking back, actually he has squandered a couple of chances there in the box where you think, why did you do that? That's weird. And it's just one of those things at Chelsea at the moment. And George, you're expecting it to turn around at some point, and like the numbers would suggest that it does.
And you think Nkunku's imminent arrival.
You'd think Nkunku. I think the only way it changes actually is that if the personnel changes. And I was thinking they have to get to January and buy another one, but I'd kind of forgotten that Nkunku is now quite close. And although let's be clear, Nkunku has never played a minute in the Premier League, and that's not an our league thing. It's just that like, he might need a few games to adapt, but the pressure is already mounting on this guy to try and fix these problems that are crippling Chelsea right now. They are stuck in the middle of the table again, and there's only one reason why. George, you're right. They do everything well except that last bit. And Dan, you're right. That's the most important bit.
But also, and on Jackson, like it's easy for us, and obviously we've seen this with Chelsea strikers going back like a decade now, where they seem to be okay anywhere else than come to Chelsea and just forget how to finish. Jackson last season scored 12 goals from 7.5 XG, which kind of tells you two things, I think. It tells you firstly that maybe this is the much feared regression to the mean, and that he was, set to have some kind of a drop off. But it also suggests that he can finish. Like there is the Nicholas Jackson we're seeing at the moment, who is completely devoid of confidence in front of goal, isn't necessarily the Nicholas Jackson we're going to see long term. So, and last season we saw everybody mocking Darwin Núñez in his first season in the Premier League. Yes, he still does. I mean, his goal on Wednesday night was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in my whole life. It's like I've never seen a moment of football define a player so beautifully. It's just a terrible touch. All the Bournemouth fans cheering, and then him picking up the ball and smashing it into the top corner from a tight angle from 25 yards. But there will be a time, if he is persisted with, where Jackson will start putting some of these away. I'm not saying that's going to be Saturday. It feels like right now, he's so far off it that it feels unlikely. But generally, if a player in La Liga is able to outperform their XG by 5, it means they haven't got a 50p pence for a foot. Like they are capable.
I just watch him and think he's not got it. And we're talking about will it change? It's early days for Jackson, so potentially that's a bit unfair. And obviously, miss out Chelsea were crap was a bit unfair as well. They were good against Arsenal the other week. That even though they threw away a 2-goal lead, that was a pretty good performance overall. I would say. Gallagher's their top rated player according to WhoScored, 7.14. That's not a massively high rating, and then under that, it's in the top 10. It's just, Raheem Sterling second, 6.99. Enzo Fernandez, 6.91 third. Cole Will and Thiago Silva, pretty similar. And then after that, it just drops. And
you've missed out Cucurella, poor bloke.
He's not in there.
He's third. He's third.
He's not on my picture. Nkunku might change it because I do think he could be a clinical player. I look at any of those players, I think they are clinical. Mudryk, he scored a fluke the other day against Arsenal. He didn't mean to do that. Cole Palmer scored a couple of penalties. I don't look at that team and think they've got that killer instinct in front of goal. So I can't see how it changes. And I don't see how Poch particularly changes that. When does he start taking some, not blame, Sam, because it's early days for him, but he looked really annoyed after the Brentford game and sounded really annoyed after the Brentford game. It's not, it's not a lot for a lot of comparison, but Spurs weren't great last season. But bear in mind what Postecoglou's come in and done at Spurs, having lost his best player. when does the manager start getting looked at a little bit more at Chelsea?
Well, Pochettino is annoyed because he's watching the same game over and over again. And it's really annoying when you watch that. It goes against you and there isn't very much you can do about it, because eventually you're going to lose your cool. And he's doing really well at the moment, 10 weeks in, to not lose his cool. I don't know how much longer he lasts, or maybe it started to crack again after the Brentford game, Dan, as you say, because I actually don't really see what he can do about this. Like, he's not in charge of buying strikers. He's also can't magically prevent injuries to key players. And I think the two things that have defined Chelsea's season so far have been injuries. There have been an absolute ton of them, particularly to key players like Reece James, like Ben Chilwell, like a few others. And also the lack of finishing, which he also can't really control because he's given what he's given. And like, I don't know, you hire the best shooting coach in the world. Like, if a striker's in a funk, he's in a funk. So I'm struggling to lay the blame at Pochettino's door at the moment. Although what I will say to try and balance the argument is he has done a few weird things. Like when he played Enzo Fernandez as a number 10 for like 3 games, I absolutely hated that. And I never, ever want to see that again. And they started the season with Ben Chilwell kind of on the left wing, which I also hated. And I never want to see that again either. So like, he's not perfect. He's not completely absolved of blame. But the two real issues that Chelsea are facing, the two things that are really holding them back, I can't lay at his door. I can't blame him for those. So I'm still giving him the time. I'm still giving him the patience.
Okay, then let's look at the combined 11. I don't know whether either of you have seen this combined 11, but how many Chelsea players do you think make it into the Tottenham-Chelsea combined 11?
Based on this season?
Yeah.
One. Conor Gallagher.
One Conor Gallagher. He is in, I can confirm. George?
Yeah, I think the same.
No, it's 3. It's 3.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a 4-3-3 formation. So we've got Vicario, who's having a great season. In goal, Pedro Porro, who I absolutely love. Romero, Colwill, and Udogie. Left back, Udogie's name. For some reason, I don't know whether you do. Anyone do weird things when they watch football? Like every time Udogie's name's said on the TV, I look at my dog and go, Udogie. I do it every time. If ever anyone's watching football with me, it must be very annoying. A midfield 3 of Basuma, Maddison, and Conor Gallagher. And then Kulusevski, Son, and Sterling is the front 3. I think that team would score goals.
So basically, if you put Heung-min Son in that Chelsea team, Chelsea would be 5th or better.
You reckon?
Yeah, it's that simple for me. Genuinely.
Maybe Nkunku will change it then.
Yeah. He has to hit the ground running for that then.
Yeah.
George, no pressure on Nkunku. Just do exactly what Son's been doing for the last
copy him, please.
Yeah.
And Chelsea win the league. Excellent. George, you're the odds checker man. What are the top 4 odds for Spurs and Chelsea?
Tottenham, as you'd expect, a pretty short price. They're still 5 to 6 to finish in the top 4. That's best price with Betway. They're as short as 4 to 7 elsewhere. That 5 to 6 does feel big. City, Arsenal, Liverpool, all comfortably shorter. And Newcastle, the next at 2 to 1. Chelsea, best price 9 to 1. That's for Sky Bet. So, by no means no hope, but you'd think, if they're beaten by Spurs this weekend, that will surely go pretty big double figures. If they lose more ground, but yeah, that 5 to 6 about Spurs. If you want to tie your money up until May, seems like a fair bet.
And just in case people aren't familiar with betting, if you put £10 on Chelsea at 9 to 1, you lose £10. Just so they're clear with what happens there. Let's get our predictions in then, George. I'll let you go first. Spurs, Chelsea.
Well, as I said, I'm just wondering if this might be a bit of one of those Premier League games that springs a shock. Easy to forget that Chelsea very nearly beat Arsenal, and deservedly so recently. I'm going Tottenham 0, Chelsea 1.
George, still ill, obviously, here. Sam, what are you going for? Can't be the same, surely.
No, goodness, no. I'm glad he's backed up his chat, though, over the last 15 minutes. He's been hinting at doing that, hinting at dropping
to be fair, brave.
I'm going to go for 2-1 to Spurs.
2-1 to Spurs, and I've gone for 2-0 to Spurs. And Mr. Odds Checker, man, that's what I would like to insert into our treble this week, please.
Noted.
Spurs to beat Chelsea. That's mine. That seems to me the most obvious result of the weekend. Although George going against it has made me question myself ever so slightly.
I wouldn't bother.
No, we're okay.
Yeah, fine.
Let's look at Newcastle against Arsenal then. And Sam, 2 in-form English strikers. I watched Eddie Nketiah play against Sheffield United last week. One of his goals was an absolute rasp. But one of those goals when the crowd go, Oh, before it goes in, that was a really nice hit.
Did you watch him against West Ham on Wednesday?
I did not. No.
Yeah, that's for the best.
Yeah, I didn't watch that. So I'll just go off Premier League.
It was similar noises. It was
Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about the Carabao Cup too much. But the game isn't Nketiah against Wilson, but they are against each other this weekend, along with Ollie Watkins as well. Next England striker after Harry Kane, who would it be?
Yes. And sorry, just to be clear, Arsenal were very poor overall against West Ham, so we can't lay all of that at Nketiah's door. But it was kind of one of those games that you watch and he doesn't really make any kind of impact because the team aren't playing well, so they can't bring him into the game and he can't get himself into the game because Nketiah is a bit of a poacher type, right? Like a lot of the time you want to bring him into the game using the team.
Isn't there a massive irony in that where like everyone spends the whole time saying Arsenal need an out-and-out striker, Gabriel Jesus drops too deep and he links up play too much, doesn't play through the middle. But they've got one in Nketiah, and when he plays and they don't play well, it's like, well, he doesn't offer anything apart from goals. It's like, well, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying you're saying this, but it's
no.
They've got the profile.
You're right.
I've heard a lot of Arsenal fans say when Nketiah he doesn't play well when he comes on to try and change a game. That he has to play from the start if he's going to be on the pitch. He doesn't offer anything from the bench. I've heard that.
I'm not sure that that's necessarily true either. Like,
also, like Callum Wilson.
I'll be honest with you. I don't rate him particularly highly. And of the pile of England strikers that we're kind of wading through here, after Kane, I've got him fourth right now. Maybe fifth, maybe sixth, maybe seventh.
Fifth in January when Ivan Toney's back from.
Well, so Ivan Toney returns in January, and I think Watkins, Wilson, Toney drop him down. If Tammy Abraham is able to recover from his knee injury, then drop him down again. And at that point, obviously, if I'm selecting the squad, I'm not taking him. He's not on my plane or train or bus or however you want to get to Germany, because ultimately, like. You've got a player like Rashford who will be taken as a wide forward and in an emergency situation will become the third or the fourth striker. So you're never taking more than three. So I'm not necessarily sure what Nketiah has to do to get into this squad, but it might be score 20 Premier League goals and suddenly become an incredible all-round forward, because I think Wilson is more Southgate's type. And we bring that conversation back to like what has Southgate tended to look for in a striker. Obviously, the model is Kane. And then in the past, he's tried to use Tammy. He's tried to use Calvert-Lewin. Let's throw him into the conversation as well. He's obviously looked at Wilson. He's been very reticent on Ollie Watkins, hasn't he, Dan? To the point where we've been questioning it. But we can all agree that over the last 6 months, Watkins has got a hell of a lot better in his general overall play, the reference point stuff, the layoffs. He looks more like Kane now than he did 6 months ago, for sure. And it's no coincidence, in my opinion, that Southgate has now finally taken the plunge on him. So as long as Watkins carries on, I think that's the model. And Nketiah is night and day to these players, in my opinion. He doesn't offer that same thing. And I just don't think that's what Southgate likes. I think he looks for a certain type of thing in a striker. And yes, you always want different profiles up front, but Rashford brings you that. And he doesn't take up a squad spot because he's already a wide forward.
Yeah,
he's also terrible up front, though, isn't he?
He is, but like we're talking fourth choice here or third. I
agree. It's just a shame. That
essentially, he never plays there, does he? If we go by previous tournaments, Harry Kane just plays every single game. That's what happens.
We always waste our energy on this debate somewhere, don't we? Like it's like Maddison going to the World Cup. It's like, of course, he's going to play 0 minutes. Like, why are we shouting about this?
We're going to continue to argue it, I think.
Because we're professional podcasters.
Because we're professional podcasters. I will say, I'm showing my non-bias here at all. As much as I think Ollie Watkins is the form English striker, I do think Ivan Toney is the best natural fit to back up Kane, because I think he does more of the things that Kane does well to a higher standard, I would say, in terms of link-up play. So it'll be interesting to see when he comes back. Who do odds checker make as the next in line to kind of get in the squad into? Sam just railed off his list, and I think Nketiah was 127th. What's the odds checker list for getting in the squad for strikers, George?
Yeah, I mean, Kane is 1 to 10 to be in the squad. Better than most ices. But obviously you're betting against an injury, and that's effectively it. Rashford is 1 to 6 again, who you'd anticipate will absolutely be there. And then it gets a bit more interesting. Callum Wilson is 10 to 11, so basically rated as kind of a 50-50 chance as to whether or not he goes. Ollie Watkins, 11 to 10, so seen as having a more than a 50% chance of making the squad. Raheem Sterling, 11 to 8, obviously been out of favour recently. His revived form, get him in. Jared Bowen, who we haven't mentioned, who I guess is another one a bit similar to Rashford, who can play.
He was really good up front on Wednesday.
Yeah.
He actually can do it.
But the issue with him, with Bowen, is that he is so effective against teams that play a high line, and it just feels like England are just not going to play against teams of the high line unless maybe it'd be quite fun just to have him in case we get into the final and play someone who who plays high. And then exactly. And then we have got Eddie Nketiah as 9 to 2, which, given that he's been in the last two squads, might be quite interesting. Tammy Abraham, 5 to 1. So it's kind of take your pick, I guess. Like, once you get beneath Kane and Rashford, you're basically looking at a 50% chance or bigger for the rest of them. So the prices don't have much of an idea. And if anyone listening or watching thinks that the likes of Wilson, Watkins, Raheem will absolutely be in the squad, then there might be some value there.
I mean, looking at the who scored head to head, it's not much between Nketiah and Wilson. Nketiah's got the superior average rating, but I imagine that was boosted heavily by scoring a hat-trick at the weekend. Wilson's got 7 goals in 9 appearances, and then Nketiah has 5 in 10. One of the big battles of the weekend, George, is Bukayo Saka against Dan Burn. Only Sheffield United average more of their attacking touches down the right-hand side than Arsenal. As much as they're a great team, Arsenal, they are pretty reliant on Saka. He is their key player.
I think both teams are so reliant on their right-hand sides in this one, which is interesting because, as we've said before in this show, like Kieran Trippier's role at Newcastle is very much the kind of the wide playmaker off that right-hand side. So it'll be a case basically of both teams trying to shift the ball out to the right-hand side as much as possible. Saka has had a very good start to the season. Obviously, he's had his injury issues. I was really surprised to see Mikel Arteta bring him on last night with 25 minutes to go when they were already basically 3-0 down and looking like they were going out of the cup. It felt like an unnecessary risk to take, but he's a magnificent player, and it feels like this is the kind of game that may well suit him. I'm interested to know, watching that Newcastle Dortmund game 10 days or so ago, where Dortmund went ahead in the first half and then just totally sat off Newcastle in a way that we haven't really seen anyone do before. And it was almost as if they were going to say, like, you are very good in transition. We're just going to let you have the ball now, and we're going to sit in a low block, and we're going to see what you can do. And they couldn't really do anything. Like, it was the most stunted attacking wise we've seen them this season. And we've also seen Arsenal at times, despite them being generally a very high pressing side in bigger games, as we've already mentioned, happy to cede possession. I think at some point, it may not be this weekend, but at some point, I think a Premier League team is going to look at that blueprint that Dortmund set out and say, well, we're going to do the same here. We're just going to sit off and let these players have it and try and nullify their threat that way. And if they were to do that, then I think that actually suits Saka very well, where he's a player who we know, even though he doesn't get to do it that often, is very, very good at exploiting space in behind, despite him also being very technically gifted and being able to get out of tight space as well. So it'll be an interesting matchup. There's no denying, despite Dan Burn being an inspired signing and someone who does himself proud for his beloved Newcastle, there are levels between these two, that there is a gap, and he'll have his work cut out in order to try and stop Saka on the day.
Don't we say this a lot? We always look at like the matchups for a Newcastle game, and you immediately, rightly or wrongly, you go, it's Dan Burn against whoever it is. Because the quality of the right winger is so strong in the Premier League that you always look at, you always on paper, you're like, Dan Burn's the weakness. And do you know what? I really feel like
never is.
I do this
he never
a lot.
gets done.
And it's like, he's very rarely the problem that we all sort of anticipate or suggest. Although saying that at the weekend, Hwang Hee-chan sent him for a hot dog. So if Hwang Hee-chan can do that, then obviously Saka can as well. But just to say that about Dan Burn is, I think I always nominate him as like the weak link, and it's like so rarely actually the case. I feel like I need to just give him a little bit more respect sometimes.
Yeah,
I agree.
He's deceptively quick, actually, because you could look at him and you think he's 6'6", 6'7". Oh, he'll get done down the wing by a pacey winger. That doesn't really happen. He's actually pretty quick. Yeah. Dan Burn, maybe not quick, but he covers the ground fast. I mean, that's the same thing as being quick. Really, he covers the ground quickly, doesn't he, Dan Burn? And you've just said about there being like a a level of difference between Arsenal and Newcastle, George, and I'd probably agree with what you say. But
it was Saka and Saka
sorry, I
and
thought you were saying about
Burn.
the
I mean,
two
I was actually going to say, like, looking at the prices for this game, Arsenal are favourites. Just they're 8-5. That's with Bet365. Newcastle 15-8. And the draw 5-2. And this is no disrespect to Arsenal at all, who are obviously a brilliant side. It's also not knee jerk from last night, which I don't think really matters. I don't think Arsenal should be favourites for this game. Like, I don't think Arsenal are the likely winners at St James's Park in a Premier League game between these two. Like, it's interesting to note that Newcastle have the best XG ratio in the whole Premier League this season, and they had the third best last season over the whole campaign. Like, their good form and their level of quality is not a flash in the pan. It's not running hot. It's not unsustainable. Like, they are genuinely one of the best sides in the division, and their home form is incredibly good. I don't, and as I think they're going to win, but I don't think I agree that Arsenal are the likelier of the two to win this game.
I agree with you, to be fair, although I have picked Arsenal to win in our predictions. I agree with you that I wouldn't make them like favourites for the game. I wouldn't say there really is a favourite for this game. I think Arsenal are the better team, obviously. They finished higher in the league last season. They're going better at the moment this season. But Newcastle last night against Manchester United, I know it's against Manchester United, but all for you. The coaching's so good there. Eddie Howe played about 5 left-backs last night. They still won 3-0. So Eddie Howe's such a top-level coach, Sam, at the moment. He got that. Whoever comes in, they know exactly what they're doing. They know their role, and they run all day for him.
They do, yeah. I feel like I say this a lot, but they keep showing it. It's the energy and the attitude on show, and the determination on show from all of Newcastle's players, whoever comes into the 11, whether it's like the established genuine stars like Isak and Guimaraes, or whether it's like Matt Targett, getting his shot, or Lewis Hall getting his shot. It's just like there's something in the water there that Eddie Howe has put in, and they all play the same tune, don't they? It's remarkable, genuinely remarkable.
Paul Dummett played last night. Dummett? I forgot he even played for Newcastle.
It was a Paul Dummett, Emil Kraft centre-back partnership.
Kraft hadn't played since last August.
Yeah, he tore his ACL.
I didn't even know those two were still there.
Yeah, I know. Amazing. You cobble it together, but it still looks the same. And obviously they've been working through Premier League games recently without Sven Botman, probably their best centre-back on paper, although obviously they've got a good collection. So Jamal Lascelles pops in.
He's come in and been good.
He's come in and been really good. So yeah, I mean, I'm also struggling to figure out why Arsenal might be favourites, other than the fact that defensively they have been exceptional this season. And while, George, you're right that Newcastle's like expected points are really high, the XG, is really like how much of it, I just don't know with it, depending on the model, like how much is that 9-0 win over Sheffield United affecting things like that?
Yeah.
Because it is a factor in a 10-game sample size. But Arsenal being so defensively solid in the Premier League this season, giving up like 0.4 XG to City and generally being very, very difficult to break down and beat, I think probably plays into the fact that they are just slight favourites here. And I will take them to win, but I don't feel good about it.
Let's look at the combined 11 before we get into our prediction. So we've got David Raya in goal. Kieran Trippier and Dan Burn are the fullbacks in this combined 11. The centre-back pairing, of course, is Emil Kraft and Paul Dummett. It's not really. It's Saliba and Cher. Declan Rice, Erdegaard and Guimaraes as the midfield three. And then Saka, Nketiah and Anthony Gordon is the front three. Again, a very nice team. From Who Scored. Let's look at our predictions then. It's worth saying before we do them, although they are locked in fairness, the last 6 games between these two, someone's won 2-0. So it's probably worth noting that fits nicely.
BTTS no 6-5.
Yeah,
best
that
price.
fits in nicely with my prediction because I've gone for Newcastle 0, Arsenal 1.
Yeah, I've gone for a 2-1 win to Arsenal.
2-1 to Arsenal. I'm really pleased that I made that prediction without knowing that stat that was knocking around. George?
I've also gone for a 2-1 win, but for the tune, 2-1 Newcastle.
2-1 to Newcastle. Oh, a nice little spread on the predictions so far. My lead has dropped, but it does make it a little bit more exciting when it's different. There's a lot of similar predictions on last week's show. I know you didn't watch, George, as you admitted before we came on, but yeah, there was a lot of samey predictions last week. Let's do the rest of our predictions then. We'll start with Fulham against Manchester United. George, what have you gone for with this one?
I did my predictions before last night's game.
We had to.
1-1.
Perfect. That's what I've gone for as well. 1-1. Sam?
Can you tell that I also did mine before the game? I actually took United to win 1-0.
Oh no! See, I really wanted to go Fulham to win, but I bottled it and went for 1-1. Brentford against West Ham, George.
This is my best pick. Brentford 2, West Ham 0. I mean, I know that West Ham have been so impressive at times, but I do just think they're a team who thrive when they can play on the counter and really struggle against sides who don't let them spring their high line. And we know that Brentford are absolute masters of dropping in and stopping teams from doing that. So I think home win.
Perfect. I've gone for exactly the same score again. Brentford 2, West Ham 0. Sam?
Brentford 3, West Ham 1.
Burnley against Palace, George. Letting you go first every time this week for some reason.
Thank you. Burnley 2, Palace 0.
Burnley 2, Palace 0. I've gone for 1-1. Sam?
1-1.
Everton against Brighton, George. I'm going to keep letting you go first.
That's fine. Thanks. 1-1.
1-1. It makes no difference who goes first anyway because they're already locked in. I've gone for Everton 2, Brighton 2. Sam?
Everton 2, Brighton 1.
Fantastic. Sheffield United v Wolves, George.
0-0.
0-0. I was tempted for that myself, I've got to say, but I went for 2-1 to Wolves in the end. Sam?
1-0 to Wolves.
Manchester City against Bournemouth, George.
3-0 home win.
5-0 home win here, Sam.
5-0. Yeah, and this is my best.
You've got 5 as well. Oh no,
yeah, I've gone 5-0. No, I've gone 5-2. This is my best pick. Can you believe it? I'm so bold. I'm so brave. Man City at home to a relegation candidate. I think this is a great pick. I think they will win. I'm going to add.
If our treble gets done by a 9-on selection, I'll be absolutely devastated. Just to say, because that makes up our treble, where we've got Tottenham to beat Chelsea, Brentford to beat West Ham, and City to beat Bournemouth. The best price on Oddschecker is 4.04 to 1. That's just bigger than 3 to 1. That's with BetMGM and BetUK. Using the Oddschecker bet slip as well means you can see the disparity in best price, and the worst price is 3.47 to 1. So basically, you're getting 3 to 1 rather than 5 to 2 if you bet using Oddschecker.
Done Newcastle against Arsenal, Forest against Villa, George.
1-1.
Well, come on, George. I've gone for 2-1 to Villa, Sam.
1-1. Sorry, mate.
1-1 as well. Okay.
Forest at home, no slouch.
Yeah, true. I've not been impressed. I was impressed with Forest at the start of the season, but not been impressed with them in recent weeks when I've seen them. Luton against Liverpool, George.
This is an interesting one because even though the obvious thing is that Liverpool battered them, if you look at the underlying numbers, Luton's XG ratio at home is good, and Liverpool's XG ratio away from home is bad. So I'm going to say slightly tighter than you'd expect. Luton 1, Liverpool 2.
Okay, I've gone for 3-0 to Liverpool, Sam.
2-0 to Liverpool.
2-0 to Liverpool. And of course, we've already done our Spurs against Chelsea predictions. That finishes off our roundup of this week's Premier League fixtures. The team we're going to focus on this week is Aston Villa Football Club. We'll start with the neutral. That's you, George. 12 wins in a row at home. The best home start to a season. There's too many words in this script. Best home start to a season at home across Europe's top 5 leagues.
Talk from the heart, mate.
Yeah, basically Villa are very good at home, George. Brilliant start to the season. Obviously, Villa have been taken apart by Newcastle and Liverpool earlier on in the season. Maybe that gave a false sense of where Villa were. But other than those games, they've been absolutely brilliant and just seem to be dispatching teams at home with ease. Obviously, they're away this week, but right up there. And really, I think Villa have got a very good chance of finishing in the top 5 and getting Champions League football potentially. Yeah,
so do I. Yeah, I mean, the goals that you score, and I'm going to say you because I'm talking to 2 Villa fans, consistently, like the level of finishing is unbelievable. Like we have spent a long time on this show talking about Chelsea and their issues in front of goal. With Aston Villa, it's the absolute reverse. And it was, for the most part, last season as well under Unai Emery. Like the red flag, and, I normally try not to mention XG more than 3 times in a show, but I'm going to break that today. Like the red flag is that you are overperforming your XG by a ridiculous amount, which probably doesn't matter because when you look at actually the deficit or the amount that you're winning games by, you're generally beating teams by 2 or 3. So realistically, maybe if you were to revert back to the mean, you wouldn't have a massive issue on your points tally. But I think the job that Emery has done is so impressive. And I think the general narrative around managers is always so binary. It's always manager good or manager bad, and it never really takes in any nuance or context. And I think in Unai Emery, you're seeing an example of a manager who is a perfect fit for a club like Aston Villa. Like, he went to Arsenal where expectations were probably higher than the actual squad quality, and he struggled to work with a group of players who were maybe of a different profile to what he was used to in previous jobs in Spain. At Villa, it's way more aligned with what he's normally done by taking teams who've maybe been mid-table previously and getting them to overperform both domestically and in Europe. And it's really great to see. I think his goal scoring exploit, something I didn't necessarily expect. But as you mentioned earlier, the form of Ollie Watkins in particular, not just in front of goal, but his general play, the improvement of Douglas Luiz, the addition of Diaby, like even Leon Bailey, who is a player that I guess he's been brilliant. And that, in the same way that we talk about Eddie Howe improving certain players, I genuinely think that when you're judging a manager's achievements, almost beyond just pure results, looking at how individual players and their career trends and their career trajectories go under a manager is probably the best way to actually equate what a manager is doing or what a head coach is doing. Like, we focus on Saturday and Sunday games or Tuesday night games or whatever. The majority of a head coach's work is on the training pitch with players and is player development, and that often gets overlooked. And Emery is doing both. He's getting the results. He's getting players to their levels to elevate. He's integrating new players with ease. And, so even though there are red flags in the data, I'm not necessarily sure it's that pertinent in this conversation about Aston Villa.
Yeah, I think the XG thing is interesting, but it's been like this for 12 months. So it's just a continuation on what happened last season. Villa had no right to qualify for Europe, yet somehow he managed to get, Brighton were raved about all season. Emery took over Villa, I think, in 17th in the league. Villa finished a point off Brighton. So Villa's form over the last 12 months has been Champions League form. So there's no reason why it can't continue, Sam. And George is right. The improvement on players that were already there. The list is endless. Conser was struggling before he came in. Tyrone Mings, before he got injured, was absolutely brilliant. Douglas Luiz, who we're going to talk about in a second. John McGinn was on the floor confidence-wise. Watkins wasn't scoring. The list is endless. There's way more players than that as well. And that is the sign of a great manager. But he's the rise of Douglas Luiz, who Villa... we were saying earlier about teams being a team and not having a star man. I think that is Villa. I think Villa's star man is the manager. But their best player probably is Douglas Luiz. And when he's not there, they're not quite the same. There's been a few cup games he hasn't played and Villa haven't looked as good. He's the second highest rated central midfielder in the league behind Rodri, which I'm really pleased with because I watch him and think he's absolutely brilliant. And I haven't always thought he was brilliant in his Villa career. To be second to Rodri, that just says how good he is. The stats back up the eye test for me.
Yeah, for sure. I wrote a piece about Douglas Luiz a couple of weeks ago for the Who Scored website. So either I've, truly got my finger on the pulse of football's most preeminent topics, or the guy that writes this script also edits my articles. It could be either one. Who knows what the real truth is there? I can't decide. But I will rave all day about Douglas Luiz and his. The rating caught my eye. It sort of got me wondering, like, okay, well, is he actually one of the best 10 midfielders, deep midfielders, number sixes in the Premier League? The Who Scored rating has him second. He's obviously had a great start to the season, but actually, let's stack them up and let's figure it out. So I did a little exercise where I tried to create a list of players that I think are definitely better than Douglas Luiz as deep holding midfielders in the Premier League. And the list is Rodri, John Stones, if you want to categorise him there, which he increasingly is, Casemiro, Bruno Guimaraes, Declan Rice, and Enzo Fernandez. And then I have a separate bucket of players that I'd be willing to have an argument/debate about on Palhinha, Czech Doucouré, Moises Caicedo, Yves Bissouma, and Sofiane Amrabat, who were all very good and probably around and about Douglas Luiz's level. So in the list that I've got that's definitely better, there are 6 players. And then the list...
I'd argue a few of those, to be honest, as well.
Oh, there you go then. And then I've got 5 who I think are in the similar bucket. So there's 11 and make it Luiz as 12. There is a clear case for him to be considered genuinely one of the best in his field in the Premier League, which is the strongest league. I mean, what an incredible place to be and what a rise for Luiz, who... 4 years ago, Dan couldn't figure out if he was a box-to-box player or what. He didn't know what his best position was. He didn't have much positional discipline. He liked stroking the ball around, but He didn't necessarily penetrate with his passes. I don't think he learns to do the defensive work until the lockdown season. He's steadily added bits to his game and got better and better and better. And it has culminated in him now being a set piece master and someone who can arrive on the edge of the box and power a few finishes home. It's making a hell of a difference to Villa. It really is. Yeah,
he does it all, in fairness. I can't think of a weak spot in his game. He doesn't even really struggle with. He's not the most physically imposing man, but I don't, because he's so good on the ball, I don't feel like that ever becomes a problem. A few years ago, West Ham were riding high, and I remember saying that they're doing this basically because of Souček and Rice, because they're providing a platform for the attacking players to go and do what they're good at, but they're also doing such a good job of protecting the back four and the goalkeeper as well. But like as partnerships go, I don't know what you think of this, George. Kamara and Luiz is a really, really strong double six partnership. They are both very, very good at a number of things that you want your number six to be good at. And Sam just said Luiz can go forward and almost become an 8 at times as well. Partnership-wise, I think it is them that's doing the same thing as I just said about Rice and Souček a few years ago. They're enabling the attacking players to go and do their thing, but they're also protecting the back four as well. I think that's a high-level midfield too.
Yeah, so do I. And I think Kamara's probably been overlooked at times, especially from neutrals, given the form of Luiz. And it's often the case when, especially given Luiz's goal scoring exploits, that's what takes the plaudits, even if a lot of his good work isn't necessarily the goals themselves. And also, I think it's very good for John McGinn to have those two, where he is then afforded a bit more of a free role. He's given some creative freedoms. He's given a lot of positional freedom as well, where he can occupy space out wide or through the middle. It just feels like Unai Emery has a really strong handle on his squad. Like we spoke earlier about Pochettino doing some quite weird things with his players, and as if he's trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle and can't really find the right pieces. With Emery, it feels like he knows exactly what he's getting out of each player, and he's found almost a formula that will encourage, enable Luiz. You said earlier that he didn't know a couple of seasons ago if he was a holding midfielder or a box-to-box midfielder. At the moment, he's kind of both, depending on the game.
So he still doesn't know. Great.
No, but he doesn't know, but he's doing both well rather than anything else. So at the moment, it feels like you're basically the only thing that can, trigger any kind of real downfall of this Villa side is probably injuries, where if you lose a couple of the players we've just mentioned, I'm not entirely sure there are those ready to kind of step in seamlessly. And also, as you said, we have seen you dispatched a couple of times by decent sides. But I think the way that you set up to play and the way Emery wants you to play, that's going to happen. It's a high risk strategy where you are effectively playing on the front foot regardless of the scoreline at any time, which as a fan, I know you guys, I know a couple of other Villa fans talking about this being the most enjoyable time to be a Villa fan of their lives. Definitely. And that isn't just results, that is the manner of the performances and the profiles of the players and the age of the players that you've got too. And the good thing is for Villa fans is that your owners are so ambitious that it doesn't really feel like you have too much to worry about in terms of losing those players. Like the amount of money it would take to get Watkins out, the amount of money it would take to get Luiz out, it feels like you're in a strong position where you're not necessarily going to get picked off.
Yeah, I think unless Man City are coming in for them as well, and potentially Arsenal, where's the massive step up at the moment? I'm not sure it's there. I think the Villa players know how good they are under Unai Emery, how much he's improved them. Sometimes you take a player out of a stable environment. Let's say Manchester United wanted Ollie Watkins. Why would you go there? You'd stay where you are, stay in a stable environment, stay in an environment that's enabled you to grow and become the player that you are. We're running out of time, but just quickly, I'm going to ask both of you this question and I'll answer it as well. I've been flitting in between this in recent weeks, in fairness. Sam, would you rather win the Europa Conference League or qualify for the Champions League?
That is an evil question.
I know. So I've been asked it a few times recently as well and struggled.
I don't have an answer. Okay. I genuinely Conference League.
Conference League.
Football is about winning trophies.
Agreed, and I've always agreed with it, but I found myself changing in recent weeks, just because I think if you qualify for because I've watched every Newcastle game in the Champions League and seen what it means to them and seen what it's like to be a part of it. I just want Villa to be a part of it. Realistically, if you win the Conference League, yes, you get a trophy. It gets you in the Europa League kind of next season. That's what it gets you in. Villa Villa can do both potentially.
Villa already European champions. You don't need to win that.
But I wasn't alive, George. I wasn't alive. I didn't see it happen before I was conceived.
I think, and Sam, you're right. Like winning trophies is is the aim. Firstly, there's no real prestige to that. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from West Ham fans who had an incredible, I'm sure they wouldn't swap it for anything. But like, of all the trophies you're going to win, one that was kind of created 2 years ago doesn't really feel like one to kind of really bust a gut for. I think it would more be the experience of probably watching your team in the European Cup final and winning and having that euphoria isn't necessarily something that, when you support a team who spent the majority of your lifetime in mid-table, is something you expect to happen. The thing is, if you qualify for the Champions League, especially given that, you're not short of a few quid, what that enables you to do in terms of actually bridging the gap to those above you in terms of recruitment is massive. And maybe, if you were to qualify for the Champions League this season, I don't think you'd be challenging for the Champions League trophy next season, but it might enable you to challenge for the Premier League trophy, Champions League trophy in the future. So I would, long term, I mean, if I was 80 years old, I'd maybe say the Conference League, but neither of you two are. So I think, be ambitious.
No. You're right. Yeah. Everything you just said is correct, and that is why it's an evil question.
Horrible question. We'll take both, though, won't we, Sam? We'll probably do both. I would imagine that's how easy it is.
Odds-wise, 6-1 for a top 4 finish.
Really?
Yeah, at the moment, best price. That's with Betway. 5-4 for a top 6 finish.
Yeah, I think I just about agree with George. I think what that gives you in terms of flexibility with spending, because you've got the massive income that comes with it. I think that just helps you grow as a football club and potentially gives you the chance to stay around the top for longer. Whereas if you win the Europa Conference League, yes, it's lovely to have a trophy, and I would celebrate it all night and have a very Larry evening, Larry week.
You have a little replica above your Jamie Tart shirt there behind.
Yeah, exactly. I probably would do that, George. Once you've won it, that's it. If you get the Champions League, that helps your football club grow and helps you stay amongst the elite. In my opinion, Champions League football would be absolutely massive. And also, just to finish, this manager wants to be in the Champions League, and if you want to keep hold of this manager, your best chance of keeping hold of him is to be operating at that highest level, in my opinion, because he's that good that Unai Emery is going to go down as the best Villa manager I've ever seen. I already know that this is going to happen, and I'm sure he will win something. But if he takes Villa into the Champions League, that's where he wants to be. He speaks about that being where he wants to be. He got Villarreal to a semi-final. That's how good this guy is. So
you may have won me over there. Give me a couple of weeks.
It's hard.
Give me a couple of weeks. I'll come back on the pod in a couple of weeks, and I'll let you know how I feel about it all.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in the week. We beat Forest. God, like some run Villa run. That does us for this week's Edge of the Box by WhoScored.com in association with Oddschecker. Thanks ever so much for joining us. If you want to subscribe to the channel with your post notifications on, that really helps the channel grow. Please do subscribe. Leave us a like on the video as well if you've enjoyed it, and comment below if you agree with what we've said in this show. We'll be back next week. Thanks to the chaps for joining me today. Have a great weekend and tell all your friends and your family about the podcast.